Welcome to Kellogg College, everyone. My name's David Howard. I'm a fellow of Kellogg College. I'm a co-director of the new Global Centre on Urbanisation, Healthcare and Urbanisation here at Kellogg. So it's a great pleasure to see many of you here, of all ages. And the centre was set up over the summer really to bring together researchers, students, members of the public, practitioners, bring together a group who are interested in discussing current issues connected with urban healthcare. So we have a series of seminars set out during the year, 6 in total. Tonight's seminar is on walkability and mixed land use, and I'll introduce our speakers here in a moment. The centre brings together various partner organisations. There is a substantive body of researchers and practitioners who are interested in sustainable urban development here in Oxford, and also a world-leading centre looking at evidence-based healthcare. So in many ways, many of the academic connections are with these two groups of researchers and practitioners. We're delighted to partner with the Prince's Foundation, who the college has had a long connection with over the last 10 years, with the Masters in Sustainable, with students on the Masters programme, the Sustainable Urban Development Programme, the course. And we're also delighted that we're working closely with the Kenya Medical Research Institute, KEMRI, and also the Mahidol Oxford Tropical Medicine Research Unit. So there is a global outreach in terms of our interests, but we're particularly interested in these seminars to bring together local residents who are interested in specifically issues of healthy cities. So it's a great pleasure to see you all here today. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our 4 speakers. We have Daniel Elsia, who works as a partner, as a director at Eliza Morrison. We have Joanna Murray-Brown, who works with the Sustainability Office here at the University of Oxford. We have Karen Barras, who is an independent consultant and advisor on environmental matters. We also have Ben Murphy, who's the head of estate of the Duchy of Cornwall, who is here en route. He will be joining us at some point, so if you see Ben arrive, he'll be going to that seat. But we'll start without him, I'm sure he won't mind. And I'll introduce the speakers in more detail as we launch into the discussion, which we will do now. So we asked each speaker to provide their opinion on the importance of, or otherwise, of walkability and mixed land use in urban neighbourhoods. So that's their brief. And first up is Daniel. Daniel Elsia is, as I said, the director of Eliza Morrison. He's the head of communications there, London-based architecture and urbanism firm. Yep. Daniel's been closely associated with Kellogg College as an alumnus. He is alumnus of the Masters in Sustainable Urban Development, which is a highly recommended part-time master's programme in Sustainable Urban Development. He's also co-chair of the International Council of the Van Allen Institute in New York. He writes extensively. He's a writer as an architect. You will see his articles in the South China Morning Post, the Landscape Architecture Museum, the Wall Street Journal, the World of Interiors, and elsewhere. So it's a great pleasure to have Daniel here today.
So the topic that I'm going to present today, or the response to the question, is about what is a kind of threat that I think is facing mixed use in walkable cities. And it comes out of a research project that I've been involved with that's turning into a book next year that we're publishing with the RIBA. So there are sort of 3, I think, existential issues facing particularly large cities, walkable cities. One of them is a lack of new housing, especially in particularly large cities in the global north, such as London. I live in East London. This is where I live, actually. It's a generational crisis as well. Being barely a millennial, it's something that I can identify with. But it's also an issue in cities like New York, in Hong Kong. There's also a crisis of urban expansion. We have, especially in the global south, we have a lot of encroachment into ecosystems and into the kind of hinterlands of places outside of our cities. You take it a place like Brasilia, for example, where you have a relatively new city that's encroaching into virgin rainforest. There's a third issue too as well, which is this idea of kind of overscale development, new development, and the anonymity of development. So this is a picture I took in Hudson Yards in New York a couple a couple weeks ago. Yeah, for a second, I thought I was in Pudong in Shanghai, and I kind of remembered actually that it was the same architectural team at a firm, which I will remain unnamed, worked on both projects. But what's interesting about this is it's very hard to tell where you are. It's disconnected from where you are in the city. So there's a need for urban intensification, though. We need to build more homes in the center of our cities, but we also need to tackle urban expansion, and we also need to, I think, deal with this issue of anonymous development. So regardless of whatever planning system, whether you're in the UK or you're in the Ukraine, planners have various tools that they can use in their arsenal to decide where intensification should happen. They look at things like the use of land, the value of land, the benefit that new development will bring, building height, transport connectivity, the relative location within a city, whether it's the topography, it's on the water, and the environmental impact. And these are all very important things that planners should look at. What we're arguing is that there should be a new and an additional thing that they look at, which is character. And character is very hard to define. So the sort of dictionary says that it's the distinctive nature of something. So what is character? How can you turn character into a planning policy tool? So we've been trying to kind of figure this out in our studio, and we've been working over, I guess, since 2016 on a London-wide character map. So we started looking at this. This is from the old London plan, not the current new draft London plan. But essentially, the GLA was looking at three broadly concentric areas within the GLA boundary, so central, urban, and suburban. And the assumption here is that decisions regarding intensification would be made based broadly on this, because the central area is broadly more compact and more dense than the urban area and then the suburban area. And the issue is here, it's broadly true, but we suspect that actually it's probably not always true. So often, though, we realize that a lot of the oldest parts of the cities are the most compact, whether they're in the suburbs or whether they're in the central activity zone, in that central zone. So we mapped the density, and by that we define as residential area density, and those red bits are the most dense of the city. And then we overlaid conservation areas, and we found that actually conservation areas are the most compact and dense, relatively, areas of London. They're also the most connected. This is PTAL, so the transport connectivity by rail is quite high. So we started thinking about what are different ways that we could actually, instead of going from that central, urban, and suburban layers of character layers, or character zones, could we actually further develop it into a more kind of nuanced and complex way. So we started looking at the historical layers of the city and where the city began. So we have Londinium, which is the square mile and a bit of Southwark, where actually the FAR, the floor area ratio, so that is the relationship between buildings is quite high. So that means the density is actually pretty high in built form, but in persons per hectare, it's very low comparative to other parts of London. There are reasons for that. It's a financial center, but should it always be like that? That's the question I'll put there. On the ancient high roads, which are the roads originally laid by the Romans, there's a persons per hectare goes up quite a bit, but the actual built density goes down quite a bit. Georgian London has a similar high level of persons per hectare, but the floor area ratios go up even further. And then the Victorian expansion in suburbs, this is quite interesting actually, has actually quite high density. So there's a quite high persons per hectare measurement there. Interesting, London is not one thing. It's evolved over time. The boundary, even that we know of it today, is actually a relatively recent construct of what we call London, which is the GLA boundary. But actually, it subsumed a variety of different places that were around London. So the former medieval market towns, many in the sort of outer boroughs, these have pretty low population density actually within them, primarily because they're probably commercial centers. But they each have a kind of distinct character. And each of these are, also we have the historic villages, which, the density goes up a bit, but these are all sort of in centers, but each with a high street usually, often within a lot of the conservation areas that we mapped, that I showed before. And then the 20th century development in the city, this is parts of the city that were built in the 20th century. They are generally the least dense, not surprisingly. But it's important to also note that a lot of this was actually pre-war. So it's pre-war and post-war development. And all of this, we've been using a GIS tool. Well, we've been doing a combination GIS tool. It's a GIS mapping, so Geographic Information System mapping, and field work, actually, quite a lot of field work to put this together. So we want to layer the historical growth with the land uses, with the town centers, and instead of the central urban suburban map, we've proposed this map, which is a broad characterization of London, which is much more complex. And this has been put into the draft London plan, you can see actually we have quite a lot of rich texture in here. So the idea is that we hope that when if somebody is looking at intensification in the suburbs rather than in the central area, they'll take the map into account. So if you take a transect through London, actually, it's quite interesting. You can see actually there are areas, and the map shows that there are areas in the outer areas of outer boroughs or in suburbs that are actually quite compact, and areas in the inner part of the city that are not so compact. And so this has all been put into a report for Historic England, which you can get the link, which is also on the GLA website. And for this work, we won the RIBA President's Award for Research, and we're now turning this into a book with RIBA as sort of an approach that we think that we can suggest to other cities across the UK and across the world to kind of use this methodology. So I guess what I'm trying to posit here is that we should look beyond these kind of simplistic ways of concentric ways of looking at a city, especially larger cities, and realize that they're much more complex. So what would character-based planning look like? A bit of a conjecture. How could a character-based intensification, I should say, what would that look like? I think it would be contemporary. You could have new buildings along the old buildings. This is a project in Vauxhall, kind of on the sort of the eastern edge of sort of the big train wreck that's Nine Elms. But this is a hectare where we have on the Lambeth Road, opposite all the Victorian mansion blocks, and there are a few Victorian schools and there where we've put in 650 homes of various typologies, whether it's maisonettes or mansion blocks using traditional London typologies from that exhibit the character of the area, but also intensify it and get more. We are getting more height. We are getting more. We're putting houses on top of mansion blocks and having a little bit of fun with it, actually. And it'll also have the tallest brick tower in Britain. But you could also imagine this approach in a radically different environment. This picture is showing ostensibly the same type of development. It's an office building with a retail mall attached to it, but two very different approaches. The one on the right is taking 100 buildings next to the souk of the old traditional city in Doha and creating a very compact urban center and looking to the character of that souk to create an architectural language that's very much of the place. A couple more pictures. I took these pictures. I was there a couple months ago. That's me. So last slide. What can cities do? We suggest that they undertake a characterization study, embrace local character as a planning tool, give urban grain status, because oftentimes the oldest parts of those cities have a street fabric that is already primed for walkability, and invest in the GIS character model of their cities so they can better understand what makes them unique.
Thank you very much, Dan. Joanne works with university. She's encouraging with her team at the sustainability. Is it sustainability office or unit? It's the sustainability.
It's environmental sustainability.
Environmental sustainability
Yes.
section of university. Promoting active travel, walking and cycling for the students and staff. She's also working closely with the local authorities to bring in a zero carbon emission zone and also looking at more sustainable forms of transport for Oxford and the surrounding area. So thank you very much indeed for joining us tonight, Joanna, and you will be taking us, I guess, to Oxford after
Yes.
Daniel's visitors around the world from London and back again. Okay, Joanna.
Great. So, good evening, everyone. Considering the topic, I've decided to share our experience at the university, and that's the experience of being a practitioner at the university, looking at transport. So as mentioned, we're within environmental sustainability, and there are 3 of us in our team that work on transport. So I did have an image, but it got lost when it got put into here, and I got a strict brief to have 1 slide, so I had to make my 1 slide, so I don't have nearly the pictures that we had in the previous one. So the context of that we found ourselves in Oxford, firstly at the university is the biggest employer in the county, and has sites located across the city. And then Oxford is a medieval city. This is actually an advantage when it comes to making a walkable city, because it was not designed around a car. So the other context that we found ourselves in is that there are existing high rates of walking and cycling in the city. And for students, the experience of Oxford is of Oxford as a walkable city. 84% of students walk and cycle around Oxford. Our numbers for staff are somewhat lower because of high property prices, and that's forced people to live outside the ring road. But even these are 44% of people who walk or cycle to work. So our work at the university is informed by the transport strategy, the university's transport strategy, and it consists of these 5 points summarised here, which is to reduce the number of car journeys in the network, to promote appropriate sustainable transport alternatives, improve users' journey experience, improve local air quality, and reduce the university's carbon footprint. So what that's all meant in terms of implementation is includes the following, not limited to this, but includes demand management of parking, behaviour change, promoting public transport, promoting walking and cycling, establishing new public transport links, and greening our own fleet with electric vehicles and cargo bikes. So of these, I think demand management of parking is probably one of the really key features. And unlike a lot of other employers, large employers in Oxford, we have had a policy that's for more than 15 years of managing parking at the university. What this means at this point is that 1 in 14 members of staff drive to work. It's reasonably difficult to get a parking permit unless you're a blue badge holder, or you have caring commitments that cannot be met without driving, and that would include living combined with living further away from your place of work. So this is quite a key feature of our policy is restricting parking, and has contributed to the real reduction of parking. That year on year we are seeing a reduction in parking, and at the same time we also charge reasonably high rates for parking, which are not always enjoyed by staff, but have helped to keep parking numbers low. And within the context of what we do, there are really recent proposals that come out in September 2019, so just last month, called Connecting Oxford. And this is a joint proposal by the city and the county council. And it's got a number of really quite bold proposals. This includes 3 new city bus gates. So there is an existing single bus gate, and there will be 3 new ones. There are also 2 others that are not in the city, but within the ring road. And there's also a workplace parking levy introduced, will be proposed, and this would also create a reliable funding source. This means that employers who've got more than 11 parking spaces would be charged between 400 and 600 in terms of the proposals per parking space. Now the university is already charging with more than that. So for the university, this wouldn't. It would mean simply having to pay that money over to the county. Whereas there are many employers that are not charging or charging very little. So this would create a source of reliable funding for the county to make transport improvements. And the aims that are included in this proposal are to reduce congestion, to improve bus journey times, reallocate road space, and improve the public realm. Also, another proposal that was a city council proposal is the zero emission zone, which is focused on air quality improvement. So in terms of the next steps for Oxford, From the university's perspective, we support the proposals, and in fact would like the county and city proposals to be widened to have further application. This also means that we're willing to adapt to the changes. It will mean we might have to travel differently to deliver differently within the university, but these are things that we are willing to do in the to take Oxford forward. We also want to promote resource sharing of vehicles in Oxford, and this means fleet sharing, as well as promoting this across the university, across the city, not just at the university. We're also involved in wanting to take some freight consolidation measures and wanting to take that further, which would impact on congestion as well and increase the move towards being a walkable city. Within the university's own estate, there are 2 sites that are in the proposals of being developed, proposal stage being developed, and that's the Oseney Mead and Begbrook. And both of these are being developed as mixed use sites, which would be employment and housing co-located. And so within all the context of all this, Oxford is well on its way to taking further steps to becoming a walkable city. And if these bold visions are being implemented, at this stage there are a proposal, and it's important that big employers like the university are behind these proposals to make them a reality. And we look forward to that. My last slide is just the map of where the bus gates would be for anybody who lives in Oxford and hasn't seen this. And those are 3 inner city and 2 further out of the city, which mean that you wouldn't be able to drive past that without incurring a considerable fine. So that's the Oxford experience and where we are at the university.
Thank you very much, Joanna. Ben Murphy is the State Director of the Duchy of Cornwall. He is charged and is pushing forward the mixed land use and walkable communities within Dorset and Cornwall.
Yes.
And
Faversham and Kent.
And Faversham and Kent. Chartered surveyor by training.
Yes.
He has worked previously with development manager for Homes and Community Agency and also with the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park. He's also advised on eco-homes for the Big Lotteries Community Spaces programme. So a vast range of public-private experience, and over to you.
Thank you very much. So I'm a planning development surveyor essentially, so building new pieces of city, urban extensions of existing towns are what I've been focused on. Really I think it's about, and this is someone who lives in the southwest, so I live in Falmouth, that's a walkable mixed-use community just like Oxford is, but there is I think a reduction needed in the need for cars, a denial of their existence, because in the southwest of England we don't have the interconnected public transport systems. You do need cars. Really what we try and do in terms of planning new urban extensions is to reduce the dependency on them. So by that I mean mixed use, mixed income, walkable communities, and in many ways we're talking about boroughs, I guess, like the best boroughs in London. We are talking about the university towns, the Bristols as well, the Brightons and Edinburghs and so forth. But I thought this was a good slide that Leon Creer, the master planner for Poundbury, produced some time ago. Really the reference is to land use planning. So I work for the Duchy of Cornwall. We're a landed estate. We own a lot of land, mainly in the southwest of England. We essentially have a development arm because of the current Duke of Cornwall, the Prince of Wales, who previously we would have just sold land when it was allocated for development, and that land would have been sold to the highest land bidder, and that's essentially what would have been okay in the 18th century, built by a local house builder sensitively as an extension of that town. And more recently, certainly in the post-war period, we've lamented the loss of character and identity of a lot of our towns and cities that have been reduced to unsustainable travel patterns and car dependency, and that's a real problem, here, and elsewhere. That's to say, for anything, going to work, cinema, to a restaurant, whatever, you need your car. You need to get in your car because you don't have the opportunities locally, the microcosm locally, the high to medium density, mixed use nature of that walkable community that creates that healthy lifestyle. So So we build communities actually with about 2 parking spaces per home. We do think about capacity for cars on the roads. They are needed whether you're less able-bodied, elderly, or indeed, like me, unfortunately, I travel maybe 25,000 miles a year building these walkable communities, which is indeed very ironic. But the point here is it was really an observation of what's happened to a lot of our historic towns and cities with that suburban sprawl. That homogenous housing that's spread out has basically been itself, I guess, in land use planning has been the ammunition that's in some ways hollowed out our historic cities, and that's obviously what we're rallying against now. So within that, I mean, it's probably just worth focusing on how do we make that work. Now, it does help being a landed estate, but we are lobbying always government, and there is quite an interesting body of movement going on at the moment, landowner legacies, where we're looking to other major landed estates as well, but also local authorities and indeed Homes England, where I worked for a year. And I was quite surprised when I did work there. I thought, if I can't deliver quality and mixed use here, where can I? And there has been, in the last few years, government coffers have been empty. They've been selling surplus public sector land, and they've been selling to the highest bidder. And when you're a developer, it puts you in a very difficult position actually to really act as a land steward and promote quality. And I'm talking about the added value of placemaking that takes time to be generated, and it's easier to build quality in the centre of Oxford. It's less easy on the sleepy urban extension in Dorchester, urban extension of Newquay, one of the poorest parts of the country, and that's what we're doing. But yes, we benefit from holding on to agricultural land, so we're not overpaying for the land. But the point I'm trying to get to is to incentivise landowners and developers to take the long-term view, that land stewardship model, to not go at the highest bidder, to build quality and actually see job creation there, and with that as well, the added value over the long term, because that's what we need. It's essentially landowners at the centre of this decision-making process, outside of, I think, the town, historic town planning scenarios we currently have just been hearing about. Okay, you said 5 minutes, so I can stop there.
Thank you very much indeed. Are there any questions for Ben? Karen Barras is, for the last 2 decades, has been working on sustainable transport initiatives, particularly in the implementation of low carbon or to decarbonise transport. She has been a researcher here at the University of Oxford at Transport Studies Unit, and over the last 7 years as an independent consultant has advised politicians, been a lead on their transport and climate policy issues. So it's a pleasure to have you here tonight, Karen, and over to you.
So David set us the provocative question, are walkable cities virtually impossible to implement? And so I'm going to answer that thinking about 3 key things. I think no, they're not impossible to implement, but we need to bear in mind 3 key things within the governance and policy implementation processes to ensure that they are possible to see through to fruition. The first is having the right level of ambition. Oftentimes, we've heard that there's opposition to things, they're hard, they detract from the status quo, and ultimately, in order to implement more walkable cities, we need to try new things and do the hard things. So then there needs to be a show of willing. A lot of my research has been looking at showcasing what best practice looks like, and time and again, researchers, practitioners, people working to deliver more walkable communities have said to me, we need to be looking at the bad practice as well. What went wrong? Why? Let's learn from that, take it forwards, and with those lessons, hopefully we can overcome some of the barriers and challenges that exist. And there are some fantastic examples of innovation out there. The A2 motorway in Maastricht is now in a tunnel. It used to completely cut through the city, and the initiative was taken, I think in 2015 or 2016, to reunite the city. Where the motorway was is now green space. It's impossible to build on top of a tunnel, so they've planted trees instead. There are these sorts of initiatives out there. In California, David mentioned my research in California. 10 years ago, the California government made the decision to mandate local authorities to consider transit-oriented development, walking and cycling within their cities as a means to reduce urban sprawl and promote more modal shift away from cars towards transit, walking and cycling. So 10 years on, we have a lot of local authorities that have come out now with their plans to implement those things. One of the panellists mentioned I think it was you, Ben, talking about how things change, people move jobs, things change,
Yes,
and things fall by the wayside. Now, by mandating a long-term vision in California for all of the local authorities, we'd actually start to gain traction for some of the ideas that will shift away from mass urban sprawl, from freeways, towards areas in which there are not only sidewalks, but actually communities that are cohesive, where people can enjoy the outside domain. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the concept of super blocks, which has been pioneered in Barcelona, but the idea, there are currently 6, there are plans for over 300, taking the conventional fabric of the city and virtually eliminating the cars through planning processes by making these streets much more in keeping with the idea that walking is delivering health benefits, it's reducing air quality. I think the statistic I read was that 200 hours will be added to everybody's life in Barcelona as a result of implementing all 300 blocks, through not only more active travel, but also because of the air quality improvements that will take place. And that brings me quite nicely on to my second key thing, which is the need for partnership. And I don't just mean in terms of on new developments, but thinking much more broadly about that. Sustainable development is a concept that needs to consider not just environmental considerations, but also economic and social considerations. And walking is such a fantastic example of that, because there are key environmental issues that walking can address. There are key social issues that walking can address. There's no barrier to entry for walking. Aside from maybe age, I would say the first couple of years of somebody's life, they're not able to walk, but ultimately anybody can walk or partake in a walkable community. So by thinking about what these social, economic and environmental considerations are, in combination, it makes policies much easier to deliver. And I think, again, we've talked about this, there's a need to integrate at different scales. So local authorities need to be talking with highway authorities in order to really understand better the barriers to delivering walkable cities. I did a piece of research in London. One of the key issues and this was talking about car sharing, but one of the key issues was that London roads aren't all owned by the Greater London Authority or Transport for London. There are many roads running through the city that the city government doesn't have jurisdiction for. So we need to see partnerships between levels of government, and part of the reason why the A2 in Maastricht was able to be put through a tunnel was because there was collaboration between both national, regional and local authority. And we also need to be thinking about budgetary partnerships. Oftentimes we hear the financial benefits of air quality improvements or health benefits to the burden on managing medical bills, and that's all very well and good, but that does not necessarily get translated into a transport budget. And by having these siloed departments within government, it's very difficult to appreciate what the holistic argument for transitioning from one way of doing things from the status quo to another one. We need to think much more cohesively about what things are going to cost, what the long-term benefits are going to be economically, in order to really make them easier or more compelling to implement. And my final thing is not thinking so much about new developments, but thinking about how we can fix things. And I want to draw on the London's walking plan as an example of this, because London has set itself the goal to have 80% of journeys taken by walking, cycling or public transport by 2041. But in reading through the plan, it does come up with some new initiatives as how that's going to be delivered, but it takes a step back. And the first 3 chapters of the plan are dedicated to understanding more about user experience. So why people walk, what journeys they're taking, where they're going, who they're going with, why people don't walk, and really understanding the purpose. And then through doing so, they have an appreciation of what the issues and barriers are to more walking. I've written down a few. User experience is a huge issue, I think. As somebody who walks daily quite far, crossings being in the wrong place or puddles being in the road because of the road surface being very poor. These are things that would make walking better for the people that are already doing it, encourage them to do it more, and encourage people who haven't walked much as a mode of transport to get out there and do so. Proximity to the traffic is a huge issue, and a number of people on the panel have talked about altering the road space to ensure that that these things can be addressed. The London plan comes up with I don't know if this is if it can be attributed to them, but they talk about the Green Man Authority. I don't know if anyone in the room is familiar with that, but it's the idea that you prioritise traffic lights for pedestrians. So the Green Man has the authority unless it senses that traffic is coming, and then it allows the traffic a period of time to pass, and then pedestrians dominate again the space, which is a very easy technical fix, but I think would be quite a good way of encouraging people if they knew that they were using the slowest means of transport, but they were doing it in a more effective and efficient way. So I think I will. Oh, just one more point on the considering what we could change that would be delivering a lot of benefit. I think that wayfinding could be drastically improved. I think a lot of people would like to go out and explore new cities or walk around the cities they inhabit, but oftentimes maybe lack the confidence about not knowing where they're going, how to get to their destination. And I think that, again, a very simple means of improving that would just be to include more signage into the urban fabric. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks so much. The next seminar is on the 4th of December, 5:30. We're looking at aspect of socially healthy cities in terms of managing migration, diversity, integration. We'll be running the seminar, public seminar, in association with Maison Française and also Compass, the university's research centre into migration and settlement. So we'll have invited speakers. I was going to say from Europe. I just don't want to go there, but we'll have invited speakers from other countries. It should be an interesting debate, so do join us then. But primarily, I would like to thank Daniel, Joanna, Ben and Karen for launching off the debate, and also for the audience for engaging. So carry on, quaff something and chat further. Thank you very much.